Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Daniel Branco. He's a renowned neurologist, neuroscientist, and author. He's dedicated his life to exploring the profound intersections between consciousness, neuroscience, and spirituality. So he has a unique ability to bridge the gap between science and metaphysics. That's what I think we're missing right now is science has divorced itself from metaphysics. His latest book serves as a guide for integrating scientific inquiry with spiritual understanding. Daniel, welcome and thank you for joining me today. How are you doing?
Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so how did you get into these topics? What actually started you down the path of ending up on the Lehto Files podcast?
So just to build on your introduction about me, I am a neurologist and I am a neuroscientist. I haven't been practicing neurology for 20 years now, and that's part of the answer because I decided at some point to go to medical school. I was in the engineering school in Brazil. I'm from Brazil. And developing microchips and things like that in the academic setting as a computer science student, electrical engineering student. And at some point, I thought, well, you know what? I want to understand the brain because to me, the brain was the ultimate computer, right? And that's what I wanted to study and understand. So, but the thing is that growing up in Brazil in the 90s, the way I found to pursue that kind of journey was moving to medical school. Medical school is undergrad in most of the world except for the US and Canada. So I dropped out from the engineering school and I went to medical school because I wanted to become a neurologist. And that I did, but I spent the whole medical school developing technologies in the neuroscience space, working in a lab, doing brain mapping, developing brain mapping techniques. So I started working with functional MRI in the 90s when it was like something pretty new, and focusing particularly on pre-surgical or pre-surgical planning. So if a person needed an epilepsy surgery or a brain tumor surgery, I would be working on their brain to try and understand which areas of the brain should be preserved during surgery because they were the more eloquent areas, the more critical areas to be kept. And by that, I was informing the surgeon. So I did that. I became a neurologist because of the research I was doing throughout my medical school and residency, which I did in Brazil. I got the opportunity to do a postdoc at Harvard. So I spent 2 years in Boston at the Brigham and Women's developing brain maps. If you had a surgery between 2004 and 6 at the Brigham and Women's, like for epilepsy or brain tumor, there is a chance I did the like I mapped your brain because that's something that I was doing at the time. And my whole time, my motivation was I wanted to understand how the brain creates consciousness.
Yeah.
That was why I was doing all of that. That's why I became a physician in the first place. That's why I decided to do neuroscience. That's why I was doing brain maps and all of that. And when I finished my postdoc, I had an offer to start as faculty in neuroradiology at Cornell University. That was back in 2006 when I was finishing my postdoc. And by the time I was already coming to the conclusion that the brain doesn't really create consciousness. And I mean, there was a huge question mark because everything that I was mapping on those brains, those were correlates of consciousness. But correlation is not causation. By measuring something on the brain while there is a conscious experience going on doesn't really prove that the brain is causing that experience. It could be the case that the brain is filtering that experience or is modulating the experience. But the nature of the experience is not really explained and I started coming to this conclusion. There is more to reality than science can show. And I'm open to be wrong, about that, but after like spending this whole time thinking about that, and all of the work that I was doing at the time, and trying to answer the questions that I wanted to answer, and realizing that science was really not equipped to answer those questions, and it was not because of a lack of technological prowess. It's not like if we wait long enough, then science one day will have the technology to answer the questions. It's not about that. There are certain aspects of reality that are fundamentally outside of the scope of science. And I think science is great. Like science is a method. It's a tool that we use, but it's a tool that we use to answer certain types of questions. Not It's not meant to answer every type of question. If we at the time we start assuming that science can answer all sorts of questions, it becomes a religion, because that's what religion is. Like it's the ultimate source of truth. Like no, the truth is coming from here. You're not gonna find any better answer anywhere else by using any other method or any other philosophy, because at the end of the day, science is a philosophy. Like it's one way to approach the world. It's one way to make sense of reality and the world. It's not the only way. But if we assume that it's the only way, that's when we make a religion out of it. And I think that's very dangerous. We should understand the limitations of science. Anyway, I'm probably going too long right now, but I'm I'll let you like keep asking from here and then.
Yeah, excellent. So what is your evidence, or what's the best evidence that you saw that the brain doesn't actually create or cause consciousness, and that it's just a correlate for consciousness, that it's some sort of receiver or modulator?
Yeah. So let me use the example that I like to use more often, because I think it's easier for people to relate to that example. And the example, I could use many other types of example, but the example I like to use is pain. Just like a normal pain, you break your arm, you're gonna feel pain, right? Scientists tend to believe that we understand how pain works because we've mapped the circuitry. Like we know there are sensitive sensory nerves that can, with sensors all over your skin and your body, that can perceive pain. And that signal is sent to your spine. If that sometimes that will generate a reflex. If you touch a hot pen, for example, your spine is going to send a motor signal to your arm to retrieve your hand from the pen, and we understand that mechanism. The mechanism of pain is understood scientifically, and that's a very simple example, right? Now, why is that mechanism associated with the conscious experience of pain, right? And if you ask that question more deeply, you realize that you don't really have a scientific answer for that question. And it's not like we can devise, in my opinion, a scientific approach to answering that question if we understand science as it is defined today. Maybe science will evolve to change its underlying assumptions. And then by that, we'll be able to answer your question. But then the question I have for you is, most scientists will believe that pain is real, right? Why is that the case? That's the question I have for you. Let's start a
Yeah.
conversation around that, because I think it gets more illustrative.
So I guess it just has to be because they experience it. And so
Exactly.
they've experienced it firsthand.
Yeah. So scientists believe that pain exists because they can feel it. But technically, from a purely scientific perspective, pain is a supernatural phenomenon. It really is. Like, there's no proof, scientific proof that pain exists.
Hmm.
There's no instrument, there's no scientific. We have instruments that can measure the electrical signals or the neuroactivity. We do have that for sure. But why are those signals associated with an experience of pain?
Hmm.
That's not something that science can really probe. We only believe Scientists only believe that pain exists because they themselves feel pain.
Hmm.
It is, you see that it's not because they were able to measure the phenomenon anyway. Like they can measure correlates of the phenomenon, but if there weren't a conscious being related, no, when you measure that electrical activity, I can tell you that I'm feeling pain. If there was no conscious being relating that, from a purely scientific perspective, you'll be completely at a loss.
Hmm.
You never know there is pain associated with that. All you'll be seeing is the circuitry, the mechanism happening, like an input, like some information processing, and an output, which is retrieving your arm. But the associated experience, conscious experiences, was never there to be found scientifically.
Hmm.
It is only there because scientists feel it. But then how come a scientist is a reliable or a gold standard for assessing the reality, the truth of reality? Like if a scientist is not entitled to accept pain for a fact because they feel it, and not accept, for example, I don't know, telepathy because they don't experience it. Like, who is the scientist to decide what is real and what is not based on what they feel? Like, you are not. I mean, this is the opposite of science, of how science should work. Like, it's not
Hmm.
about you. It's not about what you feel. Science is not about what you feel. So, I mean, give me a break. You don't know if pain exists scientifically. Pain
Hmm.
is a supernatural phenomenon. But
Hmm.
then we accept some supernatural phenomenon as real because they are more prevalent. So there is a consensus among us that phenomenon exists, and we don't accept certain other phenomenon which are just as supernatural because there's no consensus around them.
Such as
Does that make sense?
UAPs. Yeah, basically, yeah, how do we know that like when you eat chocolate and it's delicious, you love the taste of it.
Right.
How can you prove that chocolate is delicious? You know, all you have is that people are buying it, they're consuming it, and I
Exactly.
guess you so I see what you're saying. That's correlates. Basically,
It's
it's not
correlated. Even
causation. It's not causation for the experience. You can't prove that chocolate actually creates that experience. You just can show that when chocolate is eaten, there are correlates, as in the people eat it again, they seem to be happier, they want more
yeah,
of it, but it doesn't actually prove the that it's delicious.
exactly. But even the concept of delicious is something that you can only make sense of and understand because you feel it as a conscious being. Otherwise, you don't have any idea. Like some people have amusia, right? They cannot make sense of music. Animals, some of them, they don't. Like I think sometimes of my dog looking at me. Sometimes I put my AirPods on and I dance to the music. Like the dog is probably completely at a loss. Like, first of all, what is he reacting to? Because he can understand the technology in my ears. But even if he could understand, well, even if he could listen to the sound, like let's say it's a loudspeaker playing the music, like what is he really doing? I cannot make sense of music. It's not something that my brain was able to process. And that's interesting because now I'm saying that the brain can actually create that experience. So it's very tricky because there is something called the brain, which is like intimately related to the experience, but doesn't really explain the experience. So clearly there is two things here. One is that science, by its instruments, unless we start using conscious instruments perhaps, but by using unconscious instruments, it cannot have access to the totality of reality. We only know pain exists because we feel it. It's not because science informed us. Science never informed us that pain exists.
Hmm.
That was not part of. So there is like a very clear aspect of reality that is outside of the scope of the method. That aspect of reality can be informed by conscious beings. So I can tell you, Chris, there is a thing called pain. You never felt it. Maybe your neurology is different. You never felt pain, but I can guarantee you there is certain a thing called pain, and you have to take my word for it. It's not a scientific thing. And so that's one thing. Reality cannot be completely understood from like the scientific method. And the other thing is that there is some physics missing here.
Mm.
There is a fundamental understanding of reality, because even if we can understand the physics of the neurons and the electricity in the neurons associated with the phenomenon of pain, there is a leap there. How does that electricity, if it is really electricity that is associated with pain, how does it create the phenomenon of pain, or the phenomenon of love or hate, or any other type of qualia? That's the term philosophers use to describe those conscious the different qualities of the conscious experience. They call it qualia. So
Mm.
where is that coming from? So you start to understand that there is a space of reality, which is the space of consciousness, of conscious experiences. And I think the philosopher that was most important in my journey was David Chalmers, the Australian philosopher on consciousness, who actually defined the hard problem of consciousness, which is pretty much what we are discussing here.
Yep.
Like there is the easy problem of consciousness and the hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness is what we are discussing here. How do we translate physical phenomena into conscious experiences? And then the underlying assumption the whole time is that, well, matter, the brain is creating the physical, the conscious experience. But nowhere in our sciences are you going to find even the slightest suggestion that matter can feel pain.
Mm.
That's not described. Like that's not part of physics. That's not part of chemistry. That's not part of anything. That matter, it doesn't matter how organized the matter is. It can be organized in the form of a brain, but it's that matter can be organized in such a way that it can produce pain. That's not really something that we can derive from the science. We are deriving that from our conscious experience of reality.
Mm.
Which begs the question then, which is more fundamental as a reality? Is it the consensus third person reality that science can explore? Or is the conscious reality, first person conscious reality, that is more fundamental? Because either the brain is creating consciousness or consciousness is creating the brain.
Mm. And so
Science
that's the
cannot
hard
answer.
question. What's the easy question of consciousness?
The easy question of consciousness will be like more related to how the brain circuitry uh, modulates behavior, for example, like memory. So we assume that there is memory in the circuitry, in the brain circuitry, but we don't really understand how it works. Like if I when I did my brain mapping PhD thesis on memory lateralization. So, for example, um, when we are encoding new memories, that involves the hippocampi, which we have in our temporal lobes. That's of like a piece of it's an area of the brain that is responsible for encoding new memories, and we know that because we know, and we've done that in the past, that when the surgeon removes both hippocampi from a person, that person cannot encode new memories anymore. You know, you've probably seen that in movies, like what is the name of the movie, 50 Dates or something, where the woman is always meeting the guy for the first time because she can't remember, like she only
Ah,
remember the past. I don't know, I think she has an accident, and then she can only remember her life until the day of the accident. And then after that day, every new memory is not stored. It's not like stored for long-term use anymore. So you
mm.
have to be relearning everything every time, every day. And that really happens. That's a phenomenon. If you remove the two hippocampi of a person, that's the person cannot encode new memories.
Hmm. What about
That's the thing.
storage?
So after that, after the memory is encoded by the hippocampus, and my work was about lateralization. If you have a more verbal kind of stimulus, for example, if you are, while you are memorizing, encoding is a text that tends to be uh, encoded by the left hippocampus. But if you're looking at imagery or particularly abstract shapes, things like that, that tends to be encoded by the right hippocampus.
Hmm.
So my work was around that. But then once the information is encoded, it's really hard to use brain mapping techniques to find where it's encoded
Mhm.
because it's kind of encoded broadly in the network, in the brain circuitry. If it is encoded in the brain at all, because we don't really, it's very hard for you like to devise an experiment where you ask the subject to, well, remember your trip to Alaska 5 years ago. And then the person will be remembering that. But you can't pinpoint where those memories are coming from in the
Hmm.
brain. Exactly. Like the whole thing gets activated. It's kind of artificial intelligence in a sense. Like the output is the result of all of those nodes. I don't I'm assuming that artificial intelligence work pretty much like the neural networks that we used to study in the 90s with the computer neural networks, where the output is a result of the weights and the contribution of every node in the circuitry, but you don't really know and understand exactly how the output is produced. So my understanding is that it's not easy at all, but it's
Huh.
the easy because technically you can probably if you had knowledge of all of the variables in the brain, you would understand how that works. Pretty much the idea being that if you understand how an AI model has been modeled and all of the weights in the nodes and everything, you can predict the output of the AI.
Hmm.
That would be the underlying assumption that if you knew everything, you'd be able to predict what the AI would going to put out. Uh, um, that's the easy problem of consciousness.
Oh,
The
I
hard
see.
problem of consciousness is the conscious experience associated with it. And we have that in AI as well. Like, is AI conscious? Like, this is a big debate. And we are kind of assuming that it's not because that's our underlying assumption of the world, that matter can act, it's not able to really feel anything. Um,
Ex- Except that
so,
we're made of matter and we feel stuff.
but we are made of matter and we can feel stuff. So either one of the two is right. Either matter can generate like abstract experiences, conscious experiences, or matter is not creating that at all. In consciousness exists in another realm, in another dimension, another world. I don't know, it's another type of existence that is outside of the scope of science to probe. It's more probably, and that's kind of that's that's kind of what I started to assume to be real because at the end of the day, it's a decision. We don't have the means, scientific means, to prove that matter can be conscious. We can infer, we can have correlates, and can have all of that, but we don't have the theory, we don't have the physics, we don't have anything to actually even suggest that matter can be conscious. So it's a big leap that we do every day as society. As humanity, we've decided to assume that that's the case, but we don't know for a fact that that's the case. We are just assuming that. But if you go your life and like for generations, assuming a thing to be true without really questioning and challenging that assumption, that's really dangerous because you can spend like generations, hundreds of years, of millennia, believing things that are not really true, or just assuming them to be true. But
But
with
this has
time, they
always been the
become.
case, right? This has always been the case. And if you look back in our past history, because right there, that example you gave for me kind of implies to me that the hippocampus works as a receiver. So it's basically receiving from the material world, if you will, and in some way encoding that somewhere, but then to actually receive the experience, which is the memory, to actually bring back the recorded experience, you're using the whole brain in some weird manner to actually bring back that information, to bring back that
Yeah.
experience.
I have a very hard time seeing the brain as something very magical. Like, because there is magic, right? Either the brain is creating magic, is creating consciousness, and it's magic. It's not something that we understand or scientific or like, it's some sort of magic. It's not described anywhere. If a scientist claims that they can understand pain, that pain is scientifically a fact, and it's understood, it's so easy to it's so easy. You just ask them to build or to design a device that can feel pain. Would you please then build this device that can feel pain, since you claim to understand what pain is, and it's like, and how to create like, if the brain creates, and you understand, like, you are a great neuroscientist and you understand how the brain creates pain, so by all means go ahead and create something that feels pain, and then good luck proving that that thing actually feels pain. And it's not like a reacting to information in an unconscious way. So that's a hard problem of consciousness.
We were
And
talking before we started recording, we were talking about, can science actually find consciousness? Could science actually prove consciousness? And what if we change our assumptions? From my viewpoint, science or the scientific method is really just a process to try and learn more about the world, to learn how reality actually works, to learn about the universe. Could it just be that we have the incorrect assumption that matter is the basis of consciousness? If we reverse it and we just start with, okay, what if consciousness is the actual base of the existence that we know? Do you think then science could actually, reveal the true nature of reality in our consciousness?
I think we can make lots and lots of progress, but ultimately fundamental understanding has to be lived. Because I think what we need to realize, and it cannot be explained. Let me try to explain that. Like, if you think of an encyclopedia, Wikipedia, the internet, whatever, if you think of like an encyclopedia, the old style on a book, you can have lots of knowledge encoded on the book, right? So the knowledge is there on the book, but that book supposedly is not conscious of that knowledge, right? And to me, that's what science does. Science produces knowledge, and it can explain and it can encode the knowledge in a certain way. But then for you to make sense of that knowledge, you have to somehow assimilate it, incorporate it. And there is a difference between knowledge and knowing. Knowledge is a 3D space-time kind of concept. It's information. Knowing, it's experiential. Like, knowing is the experience of making sense of knowledge.
Hmm.
So I don't think science can go all the way to the point of uh I mean, how science informs us on the experience. Science can explain certain things, a lot of things about the experience, but then if you can't see, you'll never make sense of the rainbow. Like, if you don't have the experience of seeing the rainbow, it doesn't matter how much science you have around you, how much technology you have around you, you'll never make sense. Of course, you can have technology that enables you to have the experience
Hmm.
somehow. Right. But then making sense of the experience, that has to be lived. It's
I
it's
see.
it's like the pain thing. We make this leap that if we understand the brain, if we understand the neurology, then we understand the experience. But it's not really the case. I think we start with the experience first. So we take the experience as a fact. The experience is the most fundamental thing. And we use science and other methods to try and explain how our experience correlates and informs us about the world around us.
Mm.
But then there's the thing is the other thing is like a if we change the assumptions, I think that the current assumption is matter is fundamental, particles are fundamental, the physicality is fundamental. Therefore, the physicality ought to be creating consciousness.
Yeah.
That's the basic logic. If we invert that, we would have to say, well, experience, consciousness is fundamental.
Yes.
And then how do we go about understanding this physical world, which derives from the experience? So it's either the experience is deriving from physical world, or the physical world is deriving from the experience. So now that I at that point at that time I had my offer to become a faculty at Cornell. I decided to, because of a lot of the work, a lot of it was influenced by the work of Dave Chalmers and the Conscious Mind. That's his book, one of his books. And I thought, you know what? Like life is about experience. I'm not gonna be learning about life from like in a lab through science. I'm gonna experience life. And that's when I took another route, became an entrepreneur, and I lived life in a totally different way instead of. But the fundamental question that I continued to pursue that, just not in the lab, because I don't think the answer is gonna come from the lab, because the underlying assumption is wrong. So for all we know, science or consciousness could be fundamental in our body, and including our brain, our kidneys, our liver, the whole thing could be a construct within consciousness.
Mm.
So instead of the brain giving us consciousness, the brain could just be a limitator factor. Like it could be the brain could be like a limiting consciousness into a human experience. You know what? Instead of being like a super like a noni potent consciousness that can perceive and feel anything, now you're gonna feel only five senses. You have
Mm.
only these five senses to feel the world, and they're not even complete. Like if you think of vision, we only see this of the entire spectrum, right? So make do with that. Make sense of reality by only having five senses, because before it was too easy. You had access to everything as pure consciousness. But now it's like a game or a
Mm.
simulation or some way for us to like entertain ourselves. Let's challenge ourselves and limit ourselves so we can better understand things or go through experiences. For all we know, that could be what's going on if consciousness is to be more fundamental.
So I've made several videos and spent the past 3 years actually looking into physics, looking into our limits of physics. And I've come
Yeah,
to
totally.
recent conclusion. I've already drafted a script for a video where basically I think what we're missing, I'm sure you've heard of the dual nature of light, where light is both a wave and a particle.
Right.
And I think in the double slit experiment, why that is so confusing. And I think what we're missing here is that matter itself is actually just a wave. De Broglie basically proved that the electron is just a wave. There's not a little particle flying around a nucleus there. It's actually just a wave. And if you look at the standard model of physics now, it's all just waves. Quantum field theory, the Higgs boson, which is supposed to unify all, the one particle that will unify all particles. But if you actually look into quantum field theory, the Higgs boson is just an excitation in the Higgs field. So essentially, there are no particles. Even matter that we consider when something acts like a particle, really what it looks like, from what I understand, and I'll make a video on this hopefully next week, is that matter is just made up of waves. It's just waves of energy. And that would explain the double slit experiment, because it's not that light is behaving like a particle, it's that matter is behaving like a wave. And that would, I believe, explain the double slit experiment and a lot of our confusion, where you mentioned there, does is consciousness fundamental, or is space-time and particles fundamental? And my own speculation at this point is that consciousness is fundamental, and we actually see it as waves, basically waves of energy somehow through space-time. So, but I guess that's my current view. What I wanted to move on to was how our brain actually creates brain waves. Why does it create brain waves? In this sense, if matter is a wave and our brains actually, all brains on Earth, so all animal brains and even plants actually create certain frequencies. And it seems like, how do we measure qualia when you talked about consciousness? Well, for one thing, we know that when we're in different conscious states based on our brain waves, um, we're experiencing different things. We're basically, when we're asleep, we're in delta, theta brain waves. And, as we wake up, then we get into alpha waves. Then it goes to um, beta and then finally gamma waves. And it's quite interesting as well that our brain waves, when we're in alpha, are right around 8. So it's 8 to 12 hertz for your alpha. And if we look at the Schumann resonance, so that's electromagnetic or resonances throughout the planet, it's right at 7.83. So I've just been very interested in how our brain actually creates brain waves. What does neuroscience know about brain waves? Why do they create? It just seems like there's not a good answer, and that does seem to relate directly to our own conscious experiences. What when we're
Yeah.
asleep and our own brain. So, what is your take on that from your past experience?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah. First of all, I think you're like you are onto something, and I saw your conversation with AI about uh, this idea of matter being all waves, and I found it very interesting. Like that conversation was pretty nice. Um, well. Mm, I don't know. That's probably a conversation more for a physicist than a neuroscientist or neurologist, because we know the brain creates waves. It's like a machine. Machines, everything around us is based on waves. It's creating waves all the time, right? Like a lot of our instruments are based on measuring signals, and signals are usually come in the form of waves. Um, so our body is, it's not just the brain that creates waves. Every type of activity creates wave. Like a cell, an individual cell is probably creating a wave
Yeah,
of
I
some
saw
form.
recently biophotons. They've actually showed that cells create their own electromagnetic emissions. So I think all forms of life create electromagnetic emissions.
Yeah. And there is something there's something about resonance in waves and being in a certain state. So if we pay more attention. And like that was really never a neuroscientific thing until meditation started coming into the Western world, and some scientists started like thinking, well, what are the correlations between meditation and brain activity, and all of these sleep studies that relate the several stages of sleep with different like wavelengths and the wave patterns that we know there's the wave there is a correlation between waves and matter, of course, but also between waves and conscious experience.
Yeah.
So somehow, I think that's part of the mechanism of how either the brain creates consciousness. So different consciousness, different conscious experiences would be associated with different uh, wave patterns, or different wave patterns are associated with how consciousness is imprinting its manifestation of matter into, like I like to think that instead of having just one reality, which is the consensus reality, the physical reality, there are actually infinite realities, each conscious being having its own conscious reality, first person reality. And what we currently understand as consensus reality, third person reality, is actually a construct that we consciousness creates to allow different consciousness to interact in a certain way. So as maybe everything is just wavy, and maybe that's how consciousness creates the world, it creates the matter, it creates manifests matter. It's a really tricky conversation. I don't have a clear answer for that. I clearly don't have a clear
Well, what I
answer
guess
for that.
what are brain waves considered from a neuroscientist point of view? Is this just like a
Well,
waste energy, or we know it
well,
correlates with conscious states?
like from as a neuroscience, I was always more on the functional MRI kind of method than the electroencephalogram kind of approach. But neuroscientists don't, they are not physicists. They don't
Mm.
tend to take the questions to that level, to that depth. It's more about like, well, I have a patient with epilepsy, and then I know when they are having a seizure, then or when there is this type of wave coming from the brain, from a certain area of the brain, then I know that that's where the seizure is originating in the brain. So it's more mechanical. It's
Mm.
not so philosophical when it comes to neuroscience, like, or at least to neurology,
Mm.
because neuroscience is a really broad space. Like you'll find people who are more like on the nuts and bolts, like I was. I was doing brain mapping to identify areas that were clearly related to very specific tasks. Like if I was doing this in the MRI machine, then I'll be able. I knew for a fact that I was going to be able to pinpoint an area right here on the other side of the brain that was correlated with this phenomenon here of the tapping of your finger. And I knew that was also going to be correlated somehow with a certain type of wave of electroencephalographic kind of signal. But for that, this specific need, which is and the thing is like when it comes to the different types of brain mapping techniques, the waves, they don't have great spatial resolution. So if you want to find this specific part of the brain that is doing something, you need something that has more spatial resolution. There is like a functional MRI. What the waves have from a neuroscientific perspective is a lot of temporal resolution.
Mm.
So you don't know exactly where in the brain that wave is coming from, but you have that information in real time. So you can see, like you have a recording of a patient, and the patient is starting to have an epilepsy seizure, and you are able to see that before you can see anything on the camera, any physical manifestation of that, you already had a wave starting and like triggering the whole thing, and then you can see the progress of that wave in the brain, and that's really helpful to understand the different patterns of seizures, of epilepsy, things like that.
Mm.
But when it comes to psychology, for example, the waves inform very little. Like there's correlation between waves and meditation states, sleep states. So waves are used a lot for like understand sleep disturbances, things like that. But they're not really being used to answer fundamental questions. So that's
Mm.
not what neuroscientists do. They're not trying to understand the fundamental questions of existence. They are in the paradigm that the brain is creating consciousness, and the brain's creating waves, and then you can use those waves, whatever you can measure. That's what neuroscientists do. They try and correlate whatever they can measure with whether you can see as a physical manifestation or people relating to you. So like on a one thing that I used to do a lot was brain mapping during surgery. The patient was like with the brain open and was awake during the surgery. And
Mm.
the surgeon will be applying electrical stimuli on the cortex. And the patient would say things like patient will have a deja vu sometimes, or they will feel like their arm will start moving involuntarily by just stimulating a certain area of the brain. So that's what neuroscientists do,
Mm.
but they are not really there to answer the fundamental questions. Fundamental questions I used to think that they would come from the answers would come from physics, and I think at this point they will really come from philosophy. I don't think because I don't think science can answer all those questions, fundamental questions.
Hmm. Yeah, so it
It's
sounds
a little
like
bit more.
so they understand the paradigm is definitely that the brain creates consciousness. And so when they see these waves come out that just happen to correlate with conscious experiences, that just happen to correlate with all the animals and their conscious or their states of consciousness, they just assume that that's a exhaust, like a secondary effect is basically what I'm
Yeah, it's like
understanding.
an exhaust. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a signal that you exactly you can go to your car and measure how much chemicals you have there. And
Yeah.
oh, maybe the engine is having this kind of problem. Or like in the airplane, you go and you take your oil out of the airplane and you send that to analysis to see if there's anything wrong with the engine. And that's pretty much the idea. It's not really
Mm.
fundamentally explaining to you how the thing works. Right.
Yeah, I guess my impression would be is that could be the waves could actually be some sort of link to consciousness. Or if you have matter that is it, like you mentioned, at some resonance frequency, then you will get some sort of interaction or some sort of result in the realm of consciousness. You know, you will get a conscious experience. But could it be the opposite, where could it be that those brain waves, the brain is actually doing that to interact with consciousness and to create that conscious experience?
Yeah, of course. There is a reason for why a computer processor operates at a certain frequency, right? Like
Mm.
I remember back in the time you choose a computer for how many megahertz or whatever gigahertz, how the more the frequency, the faster the computer was. Like that was
Yes.
the logic for that kind of processing, right?
Mm.
Because it was the amount of computations the computer, the CPU or the chip was able to make. Uh, and in the brain, those waves and those frequencies, they are there for a reason as well. It's just not as clear as it is in the case of something that we designed from scratch, like a computer chip. But I mean, to me, clearly, the body is a machine. Like
Mm.
I think we temporarily wear this machine, this body, to experience a reality that is not of our own nature. So as consciousness, we are not material things. We are conscious things. Like we exist in
Mm.
consciousness space, not in physical space. But we need a body to interact with physical space, whatever that is, or I don't know. But that's my take. And the body has all is a machine. It feels like it was designed. I didn't want to say that, but it feels like it's either the universe is a great designer, like because the current idea is that if you wait long enough, the universe is going to create something amazing, like the brain, right? Like the bodies and the biology and things like that. That's
Yes.
the current assumption. And I think that I mean this is a it's such a lame explanation. Like I mean it might be true, but it's quite lame. Like it's not really explaining much. It's like saying, no, we understand pain because we see the nerves here. See, no, there is pain. I can prove to you if I do this, you're gonna feel pain.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we're not really proving anything.
Have you listened to the telepathy tapes?
I have, and I think it's one of the most amazing things recently produced in the neuroscience space. And I think it's just inexcusable that neuroscience has not catched that earlier. And that
Yeah.
makes it pretty clear that science is not really about science. Science is about scientists.
Yes.
So whatever scientists accept to be acceptable, that's science. And whatever they don't accept to be acceptable, that's not science. So at
Yes.
the end of the day, it's people deciding what's true and what's not. And that was one of the main reasons I decided to quit academia because it was such a religion, it was a cathedral. Like, who are you to decide what can and cannot be studied? And it's so much arrogance.
Mm.
And I quit because of that. And I think the telepathy tapes are a great example of that. Great
Yeah, just for
example.
my
It's just
audience, yeah, I just listened to it
yeah.
a few days ago, and basically it came out in September of this year, so 2020, 2024. And really the podcast goes through and makes the very compelling argument with actual tons of tests where autistic nonverbal kids, essentially, most of them, people in general, can actually communicate telepathically. And they can not, it's not just communicate, but they can literally see through the eyes of people around them. They can actually meet across the whole earth on this place called the Talk on the Hill. So they can meet in like a virtual telepathic chat room. And it just really blows the door open, I think, on telepathy, that it actually will be proven true. It has to be in the near future. And yeah, like you said, it just seems like if neuroscience hasn't seen that, my own suspicions is that it's been hidden on purpose, and I think it's related to the UAP, the whole non-human
Yeah.
intelligence question.
Yeah, because there is someone somewhere deciding, it's not just one person, but there is this thing that when you want to do certain types of research are easier to get funded than others. Yeah, it's not a conspiracy theory, it's just a fact. Certain research are easier to get funded than others. And I feel embarrassed as a neuroscientist that things that are so obvious, like 100% accuracy that certain kids have with telepathy, and we are completely just ignoring them.
Yes,
And it's shameful. Like I would be embarrassed to be a neuroscience in academia right now. Like like it's embarrassing.
I
It's
think all
it's
science
it's
is
it's
gonna, yeah.
it's a sign of of our prejudice, and it's a proof that science is not about science, it's about scientists. And it's disgraceful, and really I'll be really embarrassing. I think the two takeaways from this is science is great, scientists not as much, but science is great. And but even science has to be reviewed. And I think
Yes.
that science, if we review the underlying assumptions of science, we're going to make much more progress. If we start accepting things like if we start embracing and bringing the supernatural to science,
Mm.
we're going to make so much progress. And we start by just accepting that pain is supernatural, which it is. Like it's not really a thing from the current scientific paradigm. And the second thing is that certain things, for as much as you develop science, certain things you can only understand by experiencing.
Mm.
It's I think it is what it is. It's not a lack of scientific prowess, technological development. It is what it is,
Mm.
as conscious beings that we are.
If you've watched my channel before, I've basically proposed the theory that macroscopic life exists. So
I like that.
basically, yeah, that we're not the top organism on this planet. I think it's quite obvious. Cells they're born into your body, they die in your body, they're trained to fulfill certain jobs, right? And if your cells actually knew about you, like I just killed a million cells. If cells knew that they're expendable essentially just to keep me alive, then maybe they wouldn't show up for work. If your intestinal cells knew that they only live for 3 to 4 days, meanwhile the neurons live your whole lifetime, would you have a revolt? Or your immune
And
cells?
this
Yeah, they have to sacrifice themselves actually. Um, so I think,
and
hmm,
that's part of the hard problem of consciousness. Like, is a cell conscious?
yeah,
Is an atom conscious? Is like those are open questions, and we don't have an answer, and we shouldn't pretend that
no
we do
test.
know the answer.
Hmm.
Just like a pilot has to be responsible by understanding the limits of the airplane, scientists and like we should be more responsible by understanding what we can and what we cannot answer. So like
Mhm.
it's irresponsible to say, oh, we understand pain, we understand love, because we have science that tell no, you don't. You don't like
Mm.
stop fooling yourself. like use science for what's to be used for.
There's been a big push, obviously non-human intelligence, and you've heard all these arguments. There's no evidence of non-human intelligence on our planet, of higher intelligence. And I've made the argument, and I'll continue to make it, is that there is actually non-human intelligence at higher dimensions on this planet right now. And it's basically corporations, states, nations, the planet Gaia. I think you can make a very good argument. I think it's obvious that nations are living, breathing Earth organisms. Basically, we make up the cells inside of these uh, larger entities of macroscopic life. And we're just like your cells are evolved not to see you, right? They don't have the senses, they don't have the ability to even understand that we exist. I think the reason we're kept in the dark and that we've been kept in the dark is actually the system itself, is that we've been evolved to not understand, to not see the higher organism. And anyone that did understand that they were inside of a larger entity, and would go and talk about it and preach about it, whether it would be inside of a certain religion or inside of a certain tribe or corporation or nation, those people were removed. They're removed from the system through evolution. So I
Yeah,
think it's actually not this, it's not even the scientist's fault. I think it's actually the system. We as humans, we've been evolved to not see the higher dimensions that we're in part of. And my argument is those systems actually have their own intelligence systems, and I believe that is non-human intelligence. I think it already exists here on the planet, and it's in the
yeah.
form of many other larger entities.
I love that you brought that up because we have to. I think at this point we are past the question: is there no human intelligence around? Even if there are no aliens, we're gonna have to deal with artificial intelligence at some point anyway, which is human derived but not non-human intelligence in a sense, right? And I think we have to come up with terms that for the first time in history we are not the smartest thing in the room. We have we have two main approaches as humanity to understanding reality. One is science, the other one is religion. And a scientist never ever had to deal with any being more intelligent than them. Like like a scientists are always considered to be the most intelligent. They will not like it will be very very difficult for the scientific establishment to make sense of the idea of that they are not the smartest thing. And in religion, we've been dealing with superior beings all the time, God being one, like God is superior to us, God created us. But we never really understood God or angels or anything like that as more intelligent
Hmm.
than us. Like they are wiser, they're superior, whatever, but not necessarily more intelligent. If anything, the devil is more intelligent than us, but not God. Like that's not something that we tend to understand God as. It's kind of intelligence is part of the creation, it's not part of the creator. It's in a sense. Like
Yes.
so I think what's going on here, like if you think we have to start thinking of how non-human intelligence would look like. And if we are engaging with superior intelligence, I think the obvious thing is that we'll find ourselves dumbfounded. I mean, that's the definition of intelligence. You don't make sense of it, or the lack of intelligence. If you are the inferior intelligence in an engagement, in a relationship, all you could expect, if you are the on the dumb side of the equation, all you could expect is to be dumbfounded. We should all of this arrogance and that we have as countries, as humanity, as scientists, as politicians, like we will have to let go of all of that if we are to make sense of higher intelligence, because we are too full of ourselves actually as
Yeah.
humanity. I think and it's gonna be great that if we have the opportunity to interact with more intelligent beings than us. Like it's something that we definitely need because we tend to think we have all the answers. and that we are at the top of the pyramid. And I think it's only gonna make us grow if that happens, uh, if we start engaging more with non-human intelligence. So
Mm.
everything that is going on right now to me is a potential example of that. We are completely dumbfounded. Like we don't
Mm.
know what's going on. We cannot make sense of their behavior and why they're doing. And like it's like my dog looking at me dancing in the room. Like it cannot make sense of it. Like what is he doing? It's us looking at UAP. We don't make sense of them. So I think it's there's a great probability there that we are dealing with higher intelligence just because we cannot make sense of it. And I think it's something for us to be mindful because we've been too accustomed and like a too conditioned for too much time to believe that we know the answer, that we are the smartest people around.
Yes. And then we question why we wake up every day and have to go to work and have to go to school to fulfill a certain role. Um,
Yeah, I think there is so much opportunity for growth and understanding by being given the opportunity to interact with something smarter than us.
hmm,
And also because there might other beings might be smarter than us and don't even realize. Like think of all of these whales. They might have language that we are not able to understand, like telepathy, like kids that we consider to be like a completely behind us. And some of them just decided not to develop verbal communication because what's the point? Verbal communication is so slow.
hmm.
Like we are so primitive beings because we use our mouths to talk. Like we don't realize how primitive that is. And they're able to communicate telepathically. And they look at like they're not doing that in the tapes, but they'll be entitled if they use our own approach to reality. They'll feel like you're so stupid, like you're using verbal communication, like what a primitive being.
Voice
And whereas
talkers.
they're communicating, right? So I think it's gonna be very humbling for us, and with that, a lot of growth is gonna come up. We're going to grow a lot through that experience, and it can be painful. I mean, there is pain in growing, and but I think that should be welcomed. If we are to stop being these animals that we are, like a
Hmm.
war waging creatures that can make sense of even consciousness, pain, that like we are so stupid as a species. I'm
It's
sorry,
well,
but we are.
as individual cells, I think we're exactly what we've evolved to be. Because individual humans
Yeah,
didn't make nuclear war. Nations fight wars and they use humans. Humans are expendable. Just like you go
yeah.
and get a fight with your neighbor, a few of your cells when you punch them are expendable. But if your little cells to them, it's some horrible event going on. They don't know the
Maybe there's
larger things.
consciousness at the country level.
Yeah,
Maybe countries are conscious beings, and
yeah,
maybe we are the cancer growing in a conscious being that because we as the cells we don't agree with what's going on. That's pretty much what
mm,
cancers are. It can be
yep,
interpreted as being like it's a cell that rebelled. Like I'm not
exactly.
doing
Well,
what you expect me to do.
we call them terrorist cells. It's basically
Yeah,
any group of cells that have their own alignment. They're not aligned with the goals of the greater organism. Um,
yeah. It
I
can
think
be
the
for
analogies are very clear to me, because it took 200 years for humanity really to accept the reality of microscopic life. In
exactly.
1683, they knew they had proof with the lens. They could see the little microorganisms, but it still took 200 years before they actually doctors started washing their hands and they came up
Yeah,
with germ
exactly.
theory.
Surgeons wouldn't wash their hands, and
Yep.
they were sure they had all the answers, and they were so
200
right.
years, 200 years.
One thing, one practice that I like having is like I'm constantly thinking, what is the most like what are the stupid things that we are doing today that we don't realize are stupid? Like because they are here for sure. Like not washing your hands in the past. Like they were
Yeah.
so certain of their that they knew everything. Like they were the doctors and all of that. So uh that's more people should be doing that, questioning, because history repeats itself all the
Yep.
time, and At any point in time in history, we were completely oblivious to important things and completely wrong
Yep.
about many things. So what are those things right now? It's important for us to explore that.
Well, think how crazy you would have sounded, right? Even just 100 years after that invention, where of the lens, where they could literally see the little animals. But everyone around you will not accept that we're made up of trillions of little tiny cells. They can't imagine that there's actually microscopic little life that gets you sick. Everyone that furthered that view was considered literally crazy.
Yeah.
All of the main institutions said that they were crazy. Same thing with Galileo when he said that, the sun is the center of the earth. He was locked up for the rest of his life. He actually spent the rest of his life
How primitive was
on
that,
home
right?
arrest. Yep.
We look back and we think, wow, that was really primitive. And then we
Yep.
think we are not primitive, right?
Exact same thing. We're doing the exact same thing now. If you look telepathy, when people channel, I'm a huge fan of Bashar, Daryl Anka,
I
other
am too.
channelers. We talk about telepathy, even though I've had Dean Radin on the show and he's done experiments that, for all intents and purposes, prove that meditation and telepathy is real with the double slit experiment. And we've had all these encounters with UAPs. The Law of One. I've been listening to the Law of One lately
I
with
think that's
Raw.
great.
Yeah, channeled again, a channeler, and now we're considered crazy, right? So I'm considered crazy when I post videos. This video may even get a little disclaimer on YouTube where it says like, telepathy is not proven real
Right.
by modern science.
It's so
So yeah,
ridiculous.
we're
Like
considered crazy. All the people, the thousands of people
I
around the
love to be
world.
considered crazy. Yeah, I'm all for it. Like, who wants to be normal anyway? If normal is to be that stupid, like, no, normal is to be watching the news and like taking sides on wars and
Yeah,
taking sides on politics. Oh, that's very
yeah,
normal. I should be doing that. Oh my
yeah.
God! Like, please, please, I don't want to be normal. But I love that you mentioned Bashar for one
Mm.
reason. Like, we know from every abduction case that these beings communicate telepathically,
Yeah.
right? That's what they do. Like, if an alien comes to you and start talking, like, I'd be like, I don't think this is a real alien.
This isn't real.
Like,
Yeah.
like the all of the accounts say it's telepathically. Like, I
All
just
of them.
knew it was in my head. Things like so. But then why are we trying to communicate with them through radio signals and stuff if they are clearly telling us we communicate telepathically?
Yeah.
And then there are channelers all over the place channeling information. So, what is the most natural way to communicate between species if not through channeling?
Yeah.
But we don't give that any credit. Even people in the UFO community, they don't give that credence, and they want to see the nuts and bolts uh craft.
Yeah.
Like the craft. They're more interested in the craft than in the beings that created the craft in the first place.
Yeah.
I
Well,
find that
that'll be
amazing. I
the
was at
proof,
the
right?
Soul,
That'll be the
yeah,
proof
I was at the
because
Soul
matter
conference.
matter creates consciousness. So if we find the
Right, right, exactly.
matter, if we find the matter that they created, then that will prove that there's actually beings. Never
Yeah,
mind that
yeah, exactly
you can
that.
talk to
Like,
them.
I was at the Soul conference, like, just people discussing how do we create an ecosystem to for venture capital to reverse engineering the craft and all of that. And I was
Yeah.
wondering, well, if you want to understand that, why don't you maybe just ask them how this works?
Yeah.
They are communicating telepathically all the time. Like, we want them to adjust to our paradigm. No, but here we do things this way. We create a venture capital fund, and then we make someone very rich because now they have a patent of this technology, and
Yeah.
that's how we work. So if you want to work with us, Earthlings, you gotta send us some stuff that we can reverse engineer. And then and then at the same time, they are communicating things that are so much more important than technology all
Yeah.
the time, like understandings about reality, understandings about our true nature, understandings, all sorts of beautiful understandings, lot of one, things like that. But we couldn't care less. We are
No.
interested in seeing the craft. It's
Yeah.
like being like a native person in the jungle. Like, I'm from Brazil, so I have that in my mind, like in the Amazon jungle. And then you don't know there is civilization out there. And then you see the car coming, and then you keep looking at the lights of the car, and you get mesmerized by the lights of the car. Oh my God, those lights are so amazing. Like a bug flying around the light. But like, who's driving the like? How is that created in the first place? What is the philosophy of the society that created a car in the first place? Those things are much more interesting than the light itself.
Well,
But
look,
no, like we're very interested in the light.
think of SETI, right? They've been looking for several decades, like 5 or 6 decades now, for radio signals. That's how they're trying to find aliens. And they've just totally disregarded that all of the hundreds of thousands of human accounts of interactions with aliens is all done telepathically through consciousness. And yet
Exactly.
not one of them have proposed, well, maybe we should just try and telepathically communicate. Why don't we listen telepathically and maybe
Because
that'll prove the existence of aliens?
that's a very stupid thing. It's one of those examples. What is the stupid thing that we believe in and we do today? It's that's a good
Yeah.
one. Like we don't have the imagination to think how humanity is gonna look like in the future. Like I don't know. Clearly, if you want to engage with higher intelligence, you gotta become smarter yourself. Like you're not going to make it by just being the smartest human, but by being smarter than other humans.
Yeah.
Like you have to take your bar much higher. Like and I think that's a real problem. I don't think that our the people that we understand as being at the top of knowledge in our society are the best prepared ones to interact with the phenomenon, like because there's so much mental blocks
Yeah.
in their heads. A child is probably much better at making sense of that than a scientist. Things like
Yeah.
that. Like we have to grow up. Like we really like at the we are toddlers as humanity. Like we are a toddler civilization. Like we are so infantile. Like we're so childish.
Yeah, I
We have
think,
to grow up.
but I really do think if you look at it from a macroscopic point of view, where we're inside of a larger system, and if you look just like systems inside of us, you have minerals, you're made of water, it's non-living, it just gives off black body radiation like anything else. But when it works together as a unified system towards the goal, right, of keeping you, the whole system alive, then we classify it as life. But I need control systems. The trillions of cells in my body have to be controlled through some sort of system, and I believe that's evolution. We've evolved. The cells in our bodies have evolved not to know about us, but still to do the job altogether for some purpose, right? I believe there is a purpose related to consciousness, and so I think the nations above us are just they're not that smart. I think of it more like a leviathan. That Hobbes, actually, the philosopher, that's what he said, is he actually named it. This isn't the first time this topic's come up about macroscopic life, as above, as below. He named it a leviathan. I think it's more like it's a beast, like an animal, plant, cybernetic organism that we've actually formed as a non-human system. You mentioned there when you talk about the scientific community, right? What do you imagine in your head, right? There's not a single person, right? It's actually a group. It's an organization of humans, but not just humans, right? It's universities. You have labs. You're thinking of computers. You're thinking of papers. There's a whole organization, really, a living, I believe, breathing organism that is the scientific community. I think that is non-human intelligence. That is, and the non-human intelligence that is the scientific community doesn't want to look at this. Basically, I think they've been evolved to where no, everything's fine. They're just trying to survive. And you look, every science community is just trying to survive like any other living organism. And knowing the
Yeah.
truth, each of us knowing the truth of the larger dimensions, it's like your cells knowing the truth. Like it's not
Which
in
is
the
a sign of
scientific community's
intellectual
interest.
limitation, right? If all you're doing is trying to survive, it's probably because you're not very smart.
Yeah. I don't think they're
Right?
smart. Yeah. I don't think they're sentient. I don't, because we have how many neurons? I actually don't know off the top of my head, but it's close to a trillion or at least
Yeah,
hundreds
it's
of
like
at least
the
hundreds of
number
millions.
same as the number of stars in the galaxy, things like that. It's a lot of.
Yeah. So if you look
What does
like,
it help? Like, we're so stupid. What does it help knowing the number of neurons anyway? Like, what are you
yeah,
gonna do with that number? Like,
but if you look like America, at least, if you look at the Congress, we don't have that many neurons. If that's actually how we make decisions and laws, there's not trillions of Congress people. The scientific
yeah,
community doesn't have trillions of people. It just has, hundreds of thousands maybe at the most. So I think they're rudimentary organisms. They're not intelligent. I think on a
exactly.
dimensional level, we're much more intelligent than, say, the scientific community. They just don't have the same number of processors. You know,
Yeah, I love this work you're doing on seeing things as a fractal. Like, what is the universe that is smaller than us, the universe that is bigger than us? What
yeah,
is what are the patterns that repeat in
yeah.
those structures, right? I love that, and I think we should do much more of that. And because we are really at this dimension, like we are this at this, we can only make sense of this order of magnitude, which is
Yeah.
about our size as our body size. Anything that is much bigger, much smaller than us, it's harder for us to make sense of.
Well, I think
But
we
we
do have
should
a
if
lot
we
of power.
understand.
We do have power. We've been able to not fully domesticate, but microbes, the microscopic world. We can ferment beer. We're going to be able. We can ferment insulin. We've been able to make human lives much better by understanding the microscopic world. We've
Mhm.
essentially started to domesticate the microscopic world over the past, several hundred years, but we can't right now, we don't imagine that the macroscopic world exists. And I think once we can imagine that it exists, because it's right there, you can see it, I think we can actually use our power as humans to domesticate, if you will, the macroscopic life. Because we don't need wars. I don't think any human on this planet wants nuclear war. That's a national thing. That's a macroscopic life tool. Is nuclear war, right? That's like a human having a gun. Is a
It's
macroscopic nation having
that's
nuclear weapons?
that a lot of that is part of our ignorance. For example, if we understand consciousness as being more fundamental, what's the
Mm.
point of making wars around material stuff?
Yeah.
Like, it's very stupid, and you don't even realize, because wars are a consequence of assuming matter is more fundamental,
Mm.
right? Because you wouldn't be making wars for like a possessions or control of matter if you had a deep understanding that that's not the most fundamental reality, and that you're being just plain stupid by doing that. Another thing that people don't realize is that whenever you are engaging in conflict, you are always, your enemy is always a version of yourself.
Yeah.
Always. Like, nobody has a fish as enemy, because a fish is very separated. It's very like different.
Mm.
It's not something where we can kill them and we can eat them, but we're not going to be hating them. We don't hate fish. Like, we
Yeah.
don't hate things that are not like us. We only hate things that are like us. That are our version of us. And that's another type of ignorance that people don't realize. Whenever you are engaging in conflict, that which you are antagonizing is you. It is you.
Mm.
Like, you want the same thing. You are in conflict because you are essentially fighting over the same thing. You want the same thing. You are the same.
Mm.
So, and people don't realize it. They think they are different. They think they are better. They think they are more right.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that the other side is just a version of all the same thing.
Yeah. Think the
Like,
exact
because
same
we are
thing.
all one. It's the lot of one. So, and it's embarrassing. Like, when you
Yeah.
start learning those things and realizing, and then when you, I myself, if I'm in conflict with someone these days, I feel embarrassed. It doesn't have to be war. It could be something, I don't know, so silly as like a
Yeah.
traffic thing. Like, uh, if you are in conflict, you are in conflict with only with yourself. It
Yes.
is like, it is what it is, and we don't realize that as like because we're very primitive. we're very primitive.
I,
There's so much for us to learn.
I think we've been evolved over millions of years, billions of years, you know, to just see what we can see. Our senses that have been limited, like you said, on purpose. If you look, it's like, you know, America hates Russia, or America is afraid of China. You know, we even talk about it as as one entity. You know, like I have no issue with a Russian person. Like actually, the Russian people I've met have been really amazing, nice, friendly, funny, and you talk to them about their system, and yeah, they think exactly almost the reverse, exactly the reverse of what I
Yeah,
think.
but we don't do enough
Yeah.
to prevent the leaders from doing that. Like we don't. I think that wars, for example, should be illegal, but I don't see
Yeah.
anybody claiming that. I don't see anybody writing to Congress people telling them wars should be illegal. Like find another way. If you have a conflict, you have a difference. Find another way. It doesn't make any sense to be telling your children at home to not fight each other because it's not how you fix things. And then you
Yeah.
become an adult and become a president, and then you go and do exactly the opposite of what you're teaching your children at home. Like it's that level of stupidity. It's really hard to make sense of.
Well, that's what
Uh,
I think. It's despite what everyone thinks, you know, the president doesn't decide to go to war, right?
yeah, exactly.
One person doesn't say we're going to war. You need all the other people there to
I
actually
totally see
go.
that.
Like everyone's like,
I
"Oh
totally see
yeah,
that.
you know, Putin is evil and Putin decided to go to war." It's like not really. Okay,
That's
Putin's
why I think
one
it
person who said that, and but you still need all the other hundred of million people to actually go and do it.
right.
It's not like
That's
it's
why
one
I think
person.
we're very powerful as the cells of this being, which is
Yes.
a country.
Yeah.
Like we have a say, like we are powerful as cells. It only takes one cell to start saying something, and then another one to agree with it, and
Yeah.
then when you
Resonance.
realize it becomes a consensus. Like, oh no, why
Yeah.
were you doing that in the first place? This is doesn't make any sense. Like,
Yeah.
we shouldn't be doing it. It's not acceptable. Like,
Mm.
racism is not acceptable. It was before, now it's not. Like
Yeah.
wars is the same thing. It's not acceptable. Like
Yeah.
you find a grown-up way to deal with that. Like,
Yeah.
but no, there is some pride. No, I'm proud of this. There is pride in. We are very far. Like, but sometimes things change really fast, even if we are far. So I very much welcome the phenomenon and whatever is going on. And I think it's gonna, I'm very optimistic
Yeah.
about the future and about all the transformation that the phenomenon is going to give us the opportunity to go through. But it's gonna, at the end of the day, it's gonna be up to us to decide. There is free will, I think, at the consciousness level. That's
Yeah.
another interesting subject. From a
Free will.
neuroscience
Yeah.
perspective, there's no free will. Like we have a deterministic brain.
Okay.
So if we have free will, that has to be coming from somewhere else, not from the brain.
Hmm.
Or maybe the
Yeah. I've
brain
had
is
many
quantum.
discussions on free will.
Yeah, that's a very also interesting topic to discuss.
So where can people find more of your work, or where can they
Oh,
interact with you?
uh, I I have this website called Spirit Duality. That's the name of this initiative. It's a book, but I'm not in this to sell books. I mean, I actually don't sell almost any of them. It's about like the discussion, the conversation. If anyone is interested in having in reading the book, it doesn't want to pay, I can send a PDF. It's on Amazon. Spirit Duality. So
Very duality.
it's about the thing is I define that we are spiritual beings just because we are conscious beings. We are from a nature, our nature as conscious beings are not is not understood scientifically. So that what makes us spiritual beings automatically, like by
Mm.
definition. And the duality is the duality about of between the third world, the third world, no, the third person reality, the consensus reality, and the first person reality, and all sorts of dualities that I discuss in the book. So spiritduality.com, or just find the book on Amazon.
Okay, so yeah, you can find the links down in the description. And I read through quickly sections of the book. It seems very interesting. Like you mentioned, there is the third person is where you can actually science can see the neurons firing, but you really need the first person experience to say, hey, that's pain. That really
Exactly.
made it very clear listening to you after reading that in your books. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for being here. And
This is awesome.
we'll have to have you on again and we'll discuss free will.
I'll be happy to do so.
Okay.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to have this conversation because it's really not every day that you find someone you can have this conversation, this type of conversation with. Most of my days, I just have those conversations to myself.
Daniel's also a longtime Patreon member, so you can go to Lehto Files, patreon.com/Chris Lehto, and join the Lehto Files community. You can see here you get access to all my videos, so it'll be ad-free and early access. Also, I put out monthly patron-only Q&As, so post your questions here, and I'll spend time and make a video only for patrons. There was also community chat, so you can join that. It's like Discord, community-only chat just for patrons. So trying to build a community there. And as a thank you for higher levels of support, $10 after 3 months, you will get an exclusive Lehto Files mug, ships all around the globe. And then at higher levels, you will get a mug, sticker, a print, mini print, and a t-shirt. And then there's even more merch up at the higher level. So really appreciate it. This really makes it possible to continue to bring this content to you guys. Thanks, Daniel, for being a long-term patron. And just so there's no more confusion, hopefully my moderators don't kill me, but I renamed the Discord from UAP Society Discord to Lehto Files Discord. So if you want to continue the discussion with people like Daniel, I believe he's on the Discord, as well as all the great moderators and thousands of members of UAP Society. You can come now, just so there's no more confusion. Call it Lehto Files Discord. So come talk with me and other interested people. All right, have a great rest of your day. Peace.